Hey everyone! You don't have to look very far in the industry to see or hear the term cloud native. Now, a lot of people look at that term and they just kind of assume it means that whatever it is you're talking about runs in the cloud. Or they'll put that statement blanket over an entire environment and say cloud native or not. Well, the answer of what cloud native means is a little bit more nuanced than that, right? Microsoft has a specific definition that they use when it comes to that term, cloud native, in relation to services like Entra, Microsoft 365, and Azure. So today I've got Paul Schnackenberg on the show, and we are going to dissect this word. What does cloud native mean? How can you get to cloud native? What are the benefits? And lots more on today's episode of Sysadmin Weekly. Hey everyone, that's a new week. That means it's time for another episode of Sysadmin Weekly. This is your podcast by sysadmins for sysadmins and dedicated to all the tireless tech folks out there working in the trenches day in and day out to keep the digital world spinning. As always, I'm your host, Andy Serwich, and I've got one of our very frequent co-hosts on the show with me today. I got Paul Schnackenberg again. How's it going, Paul?
I'm good, thanks, Andy. How are you?
I'm doing good. I can't complain. I know I say that every episode, right? The whole I can't complain. Maybe one of these days I'll complain, but today's not that day. So, but yeah, we've got a good one lined up today, Paul. We are talking about cloud native, mainly what it is, how do we get there, what are the benefits, right? But before we do that, we've got a couple of recurring segments that we do at the beginning of every show. All of our existing listeners know that. If you're new to the show, welcome. We have a bit of IT nerdy fun for the first 10 or 15 minutes of the show where we just talk about kind of the IT stuff of the day and what we've been working on. And then we get into our main segment after that. So the first thing we start with usually is our News React segment, and this is the segment of the show where my co-host and I, we each choose a current IT-related news item that kind of caught our eyes. And Paul, I'm going to let you go first for this one. What's caught your eye recently?
So as listeners and viewers probably know, I do tend to focus a lot on cybersecurity. I thought this was a huge one. So there is a guy called Dirk-Jan Mollema. He's been around for a really long time. I've read a lot of blog posts of his, and he basically discovered in Entra ID there are these identities that Microsoft manage for you to do stuff in the background. He found some of those. Then he found that it turned out that they didn't validate the keys that were generated for them and properly. And by chaining this together, he essentially came up with a method where he could have minted a global admin account in every single Entra ID tenant on the planet. And then gone wild with those things. And some of these creations wouldn't even have shown up in the logs. So we got the link to the article. You can read the details here. Of course, he's a white hat hacker, so he reported this to Microsoft. They fixed it, and hopefully they're looking for anything kind of similar vulnerabilities. But this is the problem when you have one directory for the planet. And ultimately, Entra ID is a directory, and then you have partitions for each tenant. But clearly Microsoft made some interesting design choices back in the day when they designed this. And some of those design choices are coming back to bite them. And this is a doozy. But fixed now. You don't need to worry. At least not through this method. Nobody's going to become a global admin tenant, global admin account in your tenant without you knowing about it.
Yeah, so viewers of the show know I work for a security vendor, and the day this news came out, I remember our security lab team chat was just blowing up over this thing. And like the first thing I said when I saw the headline is I'm like, one shared identity infrastructure. What could go wrong? Like I, I you know, I'm glad they found it, and it was found by a white hat and not somebody with nefarious intent, right? And so that's a good one, and hopefully we don't run into anything else like that. But yeah, I've always questioned the single identity, infrastructure type of thing, right? Like you said, they partition it off based on organization, right? But still, when you get right down to the base level, seems like there should be a little more separation than that. But I don't architect massive global identity systems, so
it reminds me of the CSRB report that spanked Microsoft a few years ago about other security failings, particularly in Entra ID. And one of the things that they brought up is they checked with GCP or Google and AWS at the time and said, if you had a similar attack, this was the Russians getting in and minting tokens for everybody again, and getting into the several government organizations in the US through the back door that way. And both Google and AWS said, no, we would not have been affected. So I'm wondering whether there is some fundamental design flaw in how Microsoft built Entra ID in the first place. I'm wondering whether there's an exhaust port here that's you got a trench that you can fly down and shoot torpedoes into, and then that blows up your whole Death Star. I'm wondering whether there is a fundamental design issue here.
I just have to point out, I'm not sure how keen Microsoft would be on the Entra ID is the Death Star type of metaphor. I'm just saying, but no, it's an apt metaphor, right? Because I mean, Entra ID underpins everything, literally everything in the Microsoft cloud. And if that gets popped by a threat actor, well, everything does, right? So, that's an interesting one for sure. My news item for the week is also security related. Not quite to that scale, though. So the one that caught my eye, because I have several Linux boxes of my own that I manage, not to mention, most organizations, especially software vendors, have Linux boxes throughout their fleet. Well, there is a vulnerability right now in sudo. I hear some people call sudo. Sudo stands for, well, this is a fun trivia fact for you. Everybody knows it as super user do, but actually some people in the dev community call it substitute user do, because it's not just for running commands as root. You can run commands as any user, right? Hence, substitute user do. So anyway, I'm sure everybody was just dying to know that, but that's your useless trivia for the epised.
I'm wondering who's out nerding who here, but that was proper nerdy. Well done, Andy. That was.
I know, nerdy. Right? I know.
Well, actually, it doesn't actually stand for that. I love that.
You caught that. I couldn't help myself. I just had to drop that. But anyway. So when we talk about this particular vulnerability, kind of if you're not familiar with what sudo does, again, it allows you to run commands as the root user in Linux, which, if you only have been working on the Windows world, the root user in the Linux world is like the God mode user of the system, right? And so this particular vulnerability allows a local attacker, so the attacker has to have shell access to the box. But as any user, even a user that's not allowed to use sudo, the threat actor can use sudo to give themselves root access. And so because of that, and it's just a command line switch, they have to use the chroot command line flag. And because of that, the CVSS score for this is 9.3. And it's already, CISA has already, reported it to their government agencies. It is in their KEV catalog already, the known exploited vulnerabilities. So it is seeing use in the wild already. If you're interested in that particular CVE, it is CVE 2025 32463. So again, that's CVE 2025 32463. Affected versions are 1.9.14 through 0.17, right? And so, yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes, folks, so you can check that out. But yeah, if you have any Linux boxes in your world, definitely take a look at those. That said, my preferred Linux distribution, Debian, out of the box, does not use sudo. So you actually have to define a root password. So some distributions, sudo's not even installed by default, but a lot of the popular ones it is, like Ubuntu comes to mind, right? So anyway, be sure to check that one out, folks. So the next item I've got on our list is our Nerd Hour segment, and of course it doesn't take an hour. One of the episodes we explained what the joke was and why it's called Nerd Hour. You'll have to go back and take a look at that. But basically, this is the segment of the show where my co-host and I, we talk about the geeky, nerdy things that we've been working on, either in our spare time or as part of our professional lives, right? And I guess, I think I will go first with this one. So, sure. While not directly IT related, kind of, sort of. So everybody knows what SEO is, right? Search engine optimization. It's been around forever and ever and ever. Well, since generative AI has come out and it has started to co-opt large portions of search traffic on the internet, there's now a new, what do I want to call it, practice? There's a new practice out there that I'm not sure has an official name yet. I've seen several names used. I've seen LVO, LLM visibility optimization. I've seen GEO, generative engine optimization. And I've seen a couple that are in between that, right? And so I have actually been brushing up on my generative engine optimization, right? Trying to figure out how that works. How does it compare to SEO? Some of the same practices apply, but some things are entirely new, right? So the whole purpose of GEO or LVO or whatever you want to call it is, how do you get content to surface to be referenced by things like ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude or whatever, right? So that's the rabbit hole I have gone down lately. What about you, Paul?
Cool. I did see somewhere that Wikipedia have a project going to do exactly that as well. Like, how do they surface their information the best way to generative AI crawlers as well? So interesting. Yep. This is going to probably be a little bit of too much information, TMI here, but I thought it was so cool as technology, so I just got to share it. So I've had low iron values for years, and I had an iron infusion last year, and my iron values were dropping a little bit too fast after that, according to the doctors. So they sent me off, and for listeners of a certain age, you've probably experienced this as well. So I had a colonoscopy and an endoscopy. They stick cameras down your throat and up your bum, and they look around. But there's some bits they can't get to. So my specialist, he actually said, well, we're going to do all three. And all three in this case meant that I came back about a month after I had my the go to sleep operation and the first checking, and he basically gave me a camera about the size of a largish pill to swallow. This camera has a battery inside of it. It lasted about, I don't know, 12 hours or something. And this thing goes through, lands in your stomach, goes through the small intestines, the long bit that's sort of roped up in your stomach, and which they can't get to from either of the other ends. And every 10 seconds, 15 seconds, every so many seconds, it's got little lights in it, and it takes a photo. And then I wore a like a little over-the-shoulder strappy thing, and then I had like a tricorder-sized device in there that communicated with the camera and recorded all these pictures. So there's no recording in the camera itself. It is all done by this external device, which also means that the external device is disposable. You don't have to try to catch it when it comes out on the other end. So then you take this recording device into the doctor the next day, and they download all the pictures from it, and then he puts together a little movie, and he sees this thing goes through to see if there's anything happening that I need to worry about. In my case, it's all good. Nothing to worry about. So whatever I'm losing iron from is not something like that. So I'll have to look elsewhere, or just some people don't absorb iron properly. So that could be a problem. Well, but it was very cool tech.
For sure. Yeah, you know how many bits and pieces of popular media have had the whole like shrink and go into the human body type of thing,
Yep.
right? I'm thinking
Yep.
like when I was a kid, the Magic School Bus. It was a cartoon. They'd shrink. You know, there was an episode they'd
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
shrink down and go inside somebody's body, right? And then I don't know if there's any old school Disney obsessed people, but there used to be an attraction at Epcot in Orlando called Body Wars, which was very much the same thing. The story of the ride was you got shrunk and put into somebody's body, right? And of course, chaos ensues, right? It wouldn't be
Okay.
all that entertaining if it didn't. But anyway, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, the future is the present now, type of thing. So,
Yeah.
10 years ago, wouldn't even have thought that was possible, right?
No, it's very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the next thing I want to do before we get to our main segment here is we have been getting some comments on the show. So really appreciate your comments, folks. I love sharing comments and feedback and your own stories, right? I love the community aspect of this show. So keep them coming. If you're interested in being read on the show, you can always comment on any of the YouTube videos for the show. You can comment on any of the Spotify episodes of the show, or you can email us at contact@sysadminweekly.com. That'll get you into our inboxes. And like I said, I love to read comments on the show. This particular comment is from user 66 Sunwoo. I think I'm saying it correctly. Hopefully I am. And this was a comment on our IT documentation episode 22, that Eric and I recorded a couple weeks back. And this one stuck out to me because I definitely related to this one. And so this episode, Paul, just so you're aware, Eric and I were talking about the importance of documentation in IT. And while us sysadmins may not like doing it, it is critically important, right? That was the crux of the episode. And so this comment, again, from 66 Sunwoo, back in college, there was one professor who said, quote, "IT people are lazy. They want the fastest and most effective way to solve a problem without too many hops and hurdles," unquote. And the commenter continues, and while he was mostly right, especially when it came down to documentation to a problem, he had methods of putting down what looked like paragraphs of text to summarize down 2 pages, while still keeping bullet points and key information intact. So, kind of shrinking whatever the communicated topic was down into its key components, right?
Mm-hmm.
What stood out to me in this particular comment was the whole IT people are lazy. And why I glommed onto this, my very first IT mentor, and Joe, if you're watching, I'm talking about you. My very first IT mentor told me way back when, this was like the 98 SE days, right? So a long time ago. I know I'm dating myself, but I digress. My mentor told me the key to IT is laziness. Not to be lazy, but the idea, if you have to do something twice, you automate it, right? That was the idea. And that has stuck with me my entire career. So, yep. And that's why I like PowerShell so much. That's why I like Bash in the Linux world so much, because they're very scriptable languages, right? And so scripting has gotten me out of a lot of tight spots over the years. So
I'd make one comment on the comment too. Again, we obviously appreciate the comment because it's interesting to hear what people have to say. I find that documentation, though, you do need to think about the audience. Right. So are you writing documentation for a junior tech that needs to understand why and how and the context? You'll need screenshots so they know what to do. Or are you writing documentation for a colleague who is as technically competent as you, in which case you can absolutely shrink it down to just the bare minimums, right? Because they know everything. They just want to know which particular settings you set, right? They don't need to understand why or how or anything. They just want to know what the settings were.
Yep.
And finally, are you writing documentation for non-tech people? Are you writing documentation for your client that may not understand technology at all? Or if you're in a larger organization, maybe it's your boss or some sort of executive report, in which case you definitely want to clean out all the technical jargon, right? Because that's just going to go right over their heads, and you
Yep.
need to document it for them. So, being lazy about the documentation, first step is probably knowing who you're writing the
Yep.
documentation for. What's the purpose of this documentation?
Exactly. I'm glad you brought that up because Erica and I, we did kind of dive into that side of the documentation puzzle in that episode. Again, episode 22, folks. I will put a link to that in the show notes so you can check it out. But yeah, that was one of the key things we talked about is who's the documentation for? Is it for the brand new, fresh out of university IT person that, needs the full procedure, or, is it the seasoned tech professional that's, old and gray and grumpy and just needs the main bits, right? So anyway, good episode and good feedback as well, Paul. And again, thanks for the comments. Always love sharing these on the show. That said, I am gearing up to record a sysadmin horror stories episode to release sometime in late October. So, folks, if you have any, really good sysadmin horror stories, why don't you share them? You can put it in the comments of this particular episode, or you can email us again at contact@sysadminweekly.com. I would love to share your stories. Now, of course, don't put any identifiable information in the story, right? But don't forget to, keep the punchline in there. So anyway, well, should we talk about cloud native, Paul?
Let's talk about cloud native.
Definitely.
So the background to why we're talking about this today is, as frequent listeners would know, I run my own MSP here in Australia. I've got a small handful of clients, and I now have one client. Well, I have one client but they have their own IT department, so I don't regard them as my client per se. I just do a bit of extra work for them. But I have one client left who has Active Directory servers, virtual machines, Hyper-V, the whole enchilada. And over the last few years, I've been sort of looking very closely at, is it time to move these guys to cloud native? And we're now getting to the point when it is time. So there's about 130 odd users probably here, say 100 students or so, round figures, and maybe 30 staff. And yeah, we're looking at going cloud native. That brought up this wider conversation between Andy and me on what does cloud native mean? What's happening in the Microsoft world? How does Microsoft see this? So I think what we're going to talk about in this episode is valuable, whether you're an MSP and you're helping your clients to perhaps get to cloud native, or you're part of a larger IT organization inside an organization. And I would like to say upfront as well, everything we say here is my personal opinion, and obviously Andy's, as a long-term IT person in the Microsoft space for decades at this point. But there is no right and wrong here, is what I'm trying to get at.
Right.
So if you're in a large organization that has certain regulatory pressures or certain physical pressures, like if you're a nuclear power plant and you're running IT for that, I don't want you to go cloud native. I don't ever want you to go cloud native ever.
No.
You know what I mean? Or you're on a cruise ship or something, right? Like you don't have the connectivity. You're not going to say, oh, well, let's just hope that the Starlink satellite is going to work well. You know what I mean? Like there are technical scenarios, many of them that do affect this sort of decision making. But I think what we're heading towards here in this conversation is also looking at, are there actual technical limitations or regulatory limitations on where you're at? Or is it simply, this is how we've always done it, so we're going to keep doing it this way?
Right. That makes sense. And, we've had many conversations on this show, you and I, Paul, Eric and I, I think Mike Nelson and I as well, too, about right tool for the right job. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't force cloud just to force cloud, right? It's not for every organization. Your cruise ship example is a perfect case, right? Because the cloud's great until you can't reach it, So that's problem one. And of course, the regulatory thing, that's a whole thing. And folks that listen to the show, Eric, our other very regular co-host, that he does IT in a super high regulatory environment. And so he'll be the first one to tell you that too, right tool for the right job. And there's just some stuff you can't put in the cloud. So, yeah,
absolutely.
Definitely good to preface the whole segment with that. So, but I guess what we might start with, Paul, is what is cloud native? And I'll let you take a swing at this one.
Sure. So this is probably something Microsoft has been on a journey on for the last 10 years. So basically what Microsoft means with cloud native is they mean you use Entra ID for your identities exclusively. So you don't have a hybrid identity, you don't have Active Directory users created there, then synchronized to the cloud to use them in cloud apps. You just have Entra ID. You do not have an on-premises Active Directory. The second thing is you move away from, obviously group policy because you don't have Active Directory anymore for end user device management, but you also move away from Configuration Manager. So for those of you who are not in the know here, Microsoft essentially probably has 3 management stories for devices, to manage devices. The first one is Active Directory and group policy. That's been around for 25 years at this point. We have Configuration Manager, which has been around even longer, much longer, because it was called something SMS before that, which was around in the early 90s. So that was around long before Active Directory was a thing. So Configuration Manager is your second option, and that's generally probably in larger businesses that have opted for that. And then you have Intune. And Intune, again, is way over 10 years old at this point. It is a cloud-based service that manages your endpoints. Now, that is Mac OS, that's Windows, that's iOS, and that's Android devices, and Linux devices. It is not Windows servers. So we'll cover that a little bit later. We'll come back to that. But so out of those 3 stories, basically Intune is the cloud native operation here. So you get rid of Active Directory, you get rid of Configuration Manager, and you just manage all your devices from the cloud. Now, the main thing that happens here when you do this is for an end user, they no longer need line of sight to a domain controller to sign in. That all disappears because all they need is an internet connection. So as long as they're anywhere on the planet, they got an internet connection, they can sign in. And of course, if they've signed in on the device earlier, depending on your settings, they can sign into that device even if the internet is down.
Yep. That's pesky line of sight to the DC, the domain controller, has always been one of the tough points with, on-premises AD. I mean, it's necessary and there's a reason for it. But, when you're at a remote office and you just want to domain join the machine, why can't I reach the DC, right? Now it's a whole thing. I've been there. I will say for this cloud native conversation, right? A couple of years ago, I did a year of technical account management for an MSP, and the goal for all of that MSP's customers was to get them as cloud native as we possibly could. And we had actually done studies about incoming service desk tickets on the traditional architected customers with the on-prem AD and all that stuff versus the cloud native customers, or as close as you could get at that time. And the difference in service desk incident, the number of tickets coming in was vastly different between the two, just because there's not as much stuff to manage with the cloud native customers. And so I always saw that as one of the big benefits is like, there's just not as much breakage because there's not as many moving parts, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think 2 other points that I want to make here. The first one is around commodity versus business specialization. So if you're a small, medium, or large business, you have certain things that make you unique, why you're a successful business. But those things will never be that you run your Active Directory infrastructure more efficiently than the next business. Like, that's not going to make you more competitive in the market. Just like running your own Exchange servers and doing it 5% better than the competition is going to have any kind of meaningful impact on how you succeed as a business. But if you have a special thing that you do really well, that is your competitive advantage. And that's where you should put your effort, right? The classic example I always give about this is when electricity first came into businesses, like 100 and whatever it is, 20 years ago or 30 years ago or something, businesses used to run their own power plants, because there was no utilities to buy power from. But nobody does that anymore. You look back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, lots of large businesses that needed car transport or truck transport, they ran their own trucks. So they had a mechanics department and they had their own places where they went and serviced those cars and trucks and whatever. That's all gone as well. You know, nearly every business leases their company cars, and they have the leasing company take care of all the maintenance and upkeep and everything else, right? So this is really the same thing, right? Like, you do not want to be in the business of trying to optimize your infrastructure if that infrastructure can be run by somebody else and you can pay them to do it. And in 99% of the cases, the people you outsource it to, whether that's your fleet management of your cars or your, email infrastructure with Microsoft 365, because those companies have the economy of scale, they can do it more efficiently than you ever could.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I've seen that case myself. Folks on the show know I've been working on a as of yet undisclosed project I haven't mentioned yet. Said project I have been using the Ghost CMS for. And, well, I had the choice. Ghost is open source. I could have spun up a virtual machine somewhere and hosted it myself. But I said, you know what? I don't want to have to sysadmin this thing myself. I could, sure. But you know what? I don't want to do it late at night. I don't want to have to worry about patches. So, you know what? I'm using the as a service version of Ghost. And, well, they just do it for me. And I worry about what's running on the Ghost instance, right? So, same thing, right?
Yeah. That's absolutely the way to go for most businesses. Again, barring the asterisk that we put at the beginning of this conversation. The second point I want to make, and this is one of the reasons. So I often call myself an IT consultant when people ask for what my role is. I mean, technically, I suppose it's owner because I own the business, but that doesn't really say anything. Now, an IT consultant's job, in my opinion, is to look at the technological tools that are available to help businesses be more efficient and run their businesses on IT infrastructure, in our case, and to see which way the wind is blowing. So when I help my clients make IT decisions, so I'm their virtual IT department, including their virtual CIO, right? I have to give them recommendations. None of them, bar that one client that I mentioned that's a bit bigger, but everybody else, they don't have any internal IT people. They don't have any people that even know a lot about IT. Now, some of them are technically okay, and that's good, and they can help me out with, resetting passwords and basic stuff. But essentially, they don't have any of that because that's not their area. That's not where they work, right?
Right.
So for me, the job then becomes, I want to make sure that the technology I recommend for them and the changes to that technology as time goes on is keeping them in the right track. So 20 years ago, that was a small business server, right? I think you should have a Microsoft small business server in your office, and it gives you enterprise grade email, something you've never had before and never had access to before because you couldn't afford it. And it gives you enterprise grade, identity and everything else that we got, say, 20 years ago, 15 years ago. But today, that recommendation is you want to be in the cloud. If a new business starts today, they're going to do everything in the cloud. Like, none of them are ever going to say, oh, well, which server are we going to buy and what are we going to put on-prem, right? That just doesn't happen. Which means that for most businesses, you want to be in the cloud as well. But if you're an existing business, maybe you're not there, so you've got to start looking at how this migration is going to go. Hence this scenario with one of my clients. But when I said wind, the way the wind is blowing, you want to look at where is the vendors that you're going to go to where are they heading? So here is Microsoft's basic official stance. They have been recommending cloud native for 10 years. They still sell Configuration Manager. They still develop Configuration Manager. They still sell Windows Server with Active Directory in it. Server 2025 came out, a year ago or something, and it has new features for Active Directory, some actually quite cool ones, which
nice
means
ones.
you're looking at Active Directory at the minimum being supported till 2035, right? 5 years mainstream support, 5 years extended support for Server 2025. You're looking at 2035. And there is no reason to believe that the next version of Windows Server, 2028 or whatever it's going to be called, isn't going to have Active Directory in it, right? So it's not that Microsoft is saying, hey, we are going to take away these tools, so you'd better start looking at your migration now. But what they are saying, and have been saying for quite a few years now, is this is not our focus. We will continue to support these tools, but we are putting our new development and new features into the cloud native stuff. You're going to see things show up in Intune, not in Configuration Manager. You're going to see things showing up in Entra ID, not in Active Directory, because that's not our focus. And that's where you then have to look at it as an IT consultant and say, okay, I can see the wind blowing in this direction. Now, if you came to me in 2015, so 10 years ago, and you said, hey, let's move these businesses to cloud native today, I'd be like, yeah, I can see where Microsoft is heading, but it's too early, right? Like there's a lot of features missing. These businesses are fine where they are today. The cybersecurity environment was very, very different 10 years ago. Today, the recommendation for me would be, we are now, it's not bleeding edge anymore, and you don't want to be too far behind and end up on legacy tech with no easy way to get out. So you want to go to the cloud today. And in this case, in my client's case, it means that they don't have to buy a new physical server for, $8,000 or $10,000 or whatever a new server is going to cost them.
And that switch from capital expenditure to operational expenditure, right? That lump sum cost versus the monthly fee. A lot of small businesses would rather go with the monthly fee, right? Just because it's easier to plan for. I don't have to pony up $12K for a server or whatever it is these days. It's been a long time since I've had to price out a new server.
Well, they are more expensive, I tell you that, because of all the supply chain issues we've had. So they're definitely more expensive. And I did tell them this. Like I told this client 7 years ago, because this server is getting long in the tooth now, I did say, this is either your last server you'll ever buy, or it's the second last server you'll ever buy. Can't tell you exactly which, but either of those two is what it's going to be. And it looks like it's going to be the last server they ever buy, because I'm planning to do this project. We're on the other side of the planet, so our summer holidays are coming up in December, and the school will be closed essentially for like 5 or 6 weeks, and that's when some of this is going to happen. So
the perfect window for downtime work, right? One of my early IT jobs was in a K-12 school district here in the U.S. So we always did a lot of work in the summertime. Very familiar with that. So, well, Paul, one of the things you've got on your list here is Autopilot. And I have to admit, it's been many, many years since I was a proper desktop administrator. So it's an area that I'm aware of, but I don't keep up on it like I do the server-related stuff. And so why don't you run us through Autopilot?
Right. So basically, I'll give you the background on that in a second. I just want to give you the background why that question is even there.
Sure.
So if you're now looking to migrate existing devices and user accounts and services from, we have Active Directory and servers on-prem, and now we're going to go to the cloud. How do you do that? Well, Microsoft has had Autopilot for, again, about 10 years. There is a new version of it that came out like a year ago, Autopilot Device Preparation, ADP, something, I think. Some people call it Autopilot version 2. It only supports cloud native. There is so in the version 1, there is a way of doing an Autopilot setup for a hybrid joined device, a device that's both joined to Active Directory and Entra ID. But in basic, the idea of Autopilot is this. You take a computer out of the box, fresh computer, newly bought, you fire it up, you sign in with your corporate account, it gets the settings and the identity from the cloud, and it sets up the device for that company automatically. So instead of the traditional way where you get the computer from Dell or HP or whoever and you re-image it with your own image and then you do all that device preparation, which takes a long time for an IT department to do that at scale. Instead, you just buy the machine off Dell or HP, whatever, have it shipped directly to the user. They sign in. You've set up all the policies behind and the ID that links that device to your organization. And it just gets a customized version of Windows with the Windows that came from the manufacturer that has all the right drivers in it already. So you don't have to maintain drivers. That comes from, Dell or HP or Lenovo or whoever.
Right.
That's the basics of a autopilot. So when it comes to going cloud native, here's the challenge. User identities is relatively easy in the sense that today, this client, as an example, they have 2 domain controllers. One of them is running Entra ID Connect, which is synchronized in user accounts from on-premises to the cloud. So you create a new user on-prem, get synchronized to the cloud, same password in both places, and now the user can sign into any cloud app and they can sign into anything on-prem. When you want to migrate to cloud native, you basically turn off the synchronization that will automatically convert those user accounts to cloud only, and now you're done. Job done. Now you just have cloud accounts and you just manage them in Entra ID or in the Microsoft 365 admin portal, and you're good to go. Easy. Devices, not so much.
Not so much. Not so much.
So Windows, and we're talking about client devices here. We'll get to servers a bit later, but Windows client devices, so Windows 10, Windows 11, hopefully you're off Windows 10 because this episode will probably come out just about the time that Windows 10 comes out of support forever.
October
so you want to
14th, I think.
Yeah, I think it's October 14th. So, which is 10 days from this time of this recording. Anyway, so there are third-party tools that will do this conversion for you. They are not supported by Microsoft. Microsoft looked internally for about a year at should they make their own tools to do this conversion. And in the end, they decided no, because they could not guarantee that there wasn't going to be something cropping up in the future. That means that you are looking at resetting these devices. You're literally going to reinstall Windows on them. And the nice thing is, and why autopilot is mentioned here, is because if you set up your autopilot correctly, it's basically reset the machine, sign back in with corp credentials, and it's going to deploy the Windows customizations that you want on there automatically.
That's really nice for a number of different aspects. One, if the machine is experiencing issues that are so bad that it requires a rebuild, you just reset it. Massive time savings just right there. But it's also a really nice experience for the end user as well. If I'm a new hire, I don't have to go back and forth with an IT department. I just get my username and password. I unbox my device. I open it up, connect it to the internet, and log in and wait. And then I should have everything I need to do my job, which is nice.
Very nice. Very nice.
Very nice.
Now, so that's devices and user accounts. The next thing you want to look at is, okay, so what services do I have on-prem and how do I now manage them in the cloud?
Yep.
So the classic one is file shares, right? So if you've got SMB file shares on-prem that you're sharing files, you can look at migrating to SharePoint, migrating to OneDrive, or of course, any kind of third-party tool that you want to use there. You want to look at printing because you will not have a print server anymore on-prem. And of course, any on-premises line of business applications of some kind, right? So in the example of this client, for example, one of the reasons we can now consider this migration is that beginning of this year, they migrated off their school management line of business application that they've had on-prem for well over 10 years at this point, and they migrated to a cloud-based different vendor. Before that, I couldn't make this move because everybody had to get to the school management application, and that sat on-prem. Now, I do want to point out here that even if you get rid of Active Directory, you can still have file shares and print servers and other things on premises and get to them with cloud-based only accounts. And there'll be some links in the show notes that can tell you exactly how to set that up. So you can be like in a semi-cloud native, I suppose. We still have some
Right.
servers if you need them. My aim with this client is to not have that.
Right. I will say for file sharing, I don't think we mentioned it yet, was Azure Files.
Mhm.
Azure Files works very, very well as well. So if SharePoint's not an option, or you don't want to use OneDrive or whatever, you need more of a traditional file share, but you still want it in the cloud and cloud managed, check out Azure Files. I've had really good experiences with Azure Files over the years.
It's a great solution. And here's another nifty option for you. If you have existing file shares and you literally just want those same file shares in the cloud, there is a tool that you can install on your file servers to synchronize everything to an Azure file share in the cloud. And then you just configure that Azure file share in the cloud to be the thing, and then you get rid of the on-premises file share. And it's got you can hook up Azure Backup to it and do your backups in the cloud. Everything it's a very nice solution if you need that.
I've used it for file server migrations as well. So I had a customer I worked with once where, I don't know, like a 2 terabyte file server or something like that. I mean, very large. Maybe it wasn't 2 terabytes. Maybe it was 1. I know it was more than the terabyte. Anyway, yeah, I just set up the sync agent, synced it to the Azure file share, made sure all the files were there and applicable, accessible is the word I'm thinking of. And then put the new server in place, install the agent, sync back down. Everything looks good. Decommission the old server. It's you can use it for that too. So either way, fantastic solution. It's one of my favorite solutions inside of Azure personally. So.
Yeah, it's a cool one. I will mention Azure Files here as well has another feature. So if you have file servers and you want to keep them on-prem, but you are running out of space, as we all know, 90+% of all the files on a file share is generally not something that anybody will ever touch. But you can't take it away because there will be that one file from 3 years ago that somebody goes looking for. If they can't find it, they're going to be real upset, right? And you in IT, of course, have no idea which files are actually hot and in use and which ones are not. So you can set up that at certain age of the file aging out, it will delete it off the file server, keep the copy in the cloud, put a pointer from the on-premise file to the cloud one. And now you essentially have a bottomless file server that you never need to buy another SSD or hard drive for, because it will just keep on running and just synchronize all the old stuff to the cloud. And if a user goes and looks in that file share from 2012 or something, and they find the file they want to open and they double click on it, the only thing is it's going to take a little bit longer as it's synchronized as that file down from the cloud again. This is a very nifty solution.
That's very nice. Yeah, for sure. The one thing I want to circle back to here, Paul, is printing. And I'm asking this question because of one of two things. Either one, printing was always my most hated service I had to manage when I was, in the on-prem sysadmin role, or my most hated service in the sysadmin role, or it's the fact that I just don't do desktop administration anymore. Sorry, a little bit of a brain fart there. But one of those two things, I haven't looked at this any time in the last couple of years. Is there a solution in the Microsoft stack to handle printing in the cloud?
There is indeed. So this is another thing Microsoft has put in place. And you can see how they're sort of putting the building blocks in place here to offer them to you. They got something called Universal Print. And this is another thing that they are developing and putting effort into, unlike on-premises print servers. If you have supported printers, so any kind of modern, whatever, Kyocera, the HP, Brother, whatever, all the modern big brands, modern printers, your multifunction devices probably support this today. So they have a built-in Universal Print client on the printer itself. You just configure that thing with the right settings, and it will connect to your print server in the cloud. Let's call it that. It's not what it sounds like, right? And now you just have Universal Print printing from the cloud. It's got all the sort of modern features that you would like from an enterprise printing solution. So, for example, you can print the job, right? So let's say you're at home, right? You can print the job, but it doesn't physically come out of any printer. You go to the office, walk up to the printer you want it to come out of, sign in on that printer, and it'll print the job there. You can release it on the printer you want it printed out on. And of course, you can print from anywhere, right? It's literally universal print. The other thing that universal print is, it gets rid of printer drivers. So you do not need to have the print driver for the specific model installed on your physical machine to be able to print to it. You could just print, and then it converts it and does all that for you. Hence, universal print, right? So you don't have to manage print drivers anymore, which is another huge benefit. And then depending on your licensing, you get X number of pages you can print per user per month. And then if you are doing a lot of printing, it all gets pooled across however many users you've got. And if you need more, you can sort of buy packs of, I think it's thousands or tens of thousands of pages per month or whatever, if you need to. And then, of course, there's third-party solutions. So another one of my clients, and this is not an endorsement, I have no relationship, something called Printix is something I deployed there. So for this client that I'm about to migrate in the next few months, we'll be looking at Universal Print, because their printers that they have today, they got 3 MFDs, multifunction devices on-prem. I think they all support Universal Print, part of my investigation. If they do, we'll try Universal Print first. If it does everything the client needs, I'll be happy. And if not, we're looking at third-party tool, probably Printix in this case, so that I can try that out. So the other things to think about here when you're looking at cloud native is your patching for your Windows and your Office devices. So traditionally that was WSUS, Windows Server Update Services, and or Configuration Manager, which relies on WSUS. WSUS is now deprecated.
Yep.
So it is going away. And the replacement is AutoPatch. So this is managed, Intune has had Windows patching for many years now, but AutoPatch makes it literally automatic, in some aspects even better than WSUS, although the scheduling is a bit dodgy. But now we have AutoPatch in the cloud, and licensing-wise, you used to have very high licensing to get it to work, didn't work with education licensing. Now it's available both education licensing and business premium. So if you've got those in place, you get AutoPatch, which literally is configure a 1-minute wizard in the Intune portal, and now your Windows devices will automatically get updates and patch themselves, and you get nice reports, and it just works automatically, which is very nice. You got a large environment, you're going to say, well, hang on a second, I've got 5,000 devices in this office. Are they all going to just download from the cloud? No. So the solution here is something called Delivery Optimization, or DO. Free. Doesn't cost you anything. Stick an agent on a small server or even a client machine, and it will cache the patches from the cloud on that machine. So it's like a WSUS Superlight. There's no policies, nothing you're doing on that machine. It's just caching the updates so that when the other 4,999 devices go, hey, I want this update, it goes, here you go, I've got it, and you get it over, gigabit Ethernet or fast Wi-Fi.
Doesn't have to pull it down, which is nice.
That's right.
I will say if you're interested in learning more about the WSUS deprecation, we did an episode on that, episode 3, I want to say. I don't remember exactly which ones. One of the early episodes, I'll put it in the show notes. But yeah, Eric and we dove into that because as finicky as that service was, it was solid over the years, right? So it was rough to see it go for a number of reasons. Solid-ish.
Problems with it was it relied on a SQL database, and the maintenance of that SQL database was
not fun.
a pain in the rear end, mate. It was terrible. I actually had a third-party tool running at this client called WAM, WSUS Automated Management. There's a little add-on tool, paid off, I can't remember, a couple of $100 something like that a year. And it took care of maintaining the WSOS database, did a great job, but of course don't need it anymore because auto-patch in the
Right.
cloud is much better.
I always found it was one of those services that you kind of just by virtue of using it learned its little quirks and intricacies, and once you were used to it, it was good. And maybe I just got to a point to where, like, I'd run into all the, the regular recurring issues, but yeah, agreed. It was a little finicky from time to time for sure. So anyway.
Other things you get when you go cloud native is you get local admin password solution. You can run that on premise as well. So instead of every end user device having the same local admin username and password, which the bad guys love, because once they compromised one machine, they can move to all the other machines in the environment. You have a random unique password on every single machine, and that is stored in Entra ID. So you got to go there to get that admin password. And then you can have policies so that the first time you use that password, it automatically gets reset to something else, so that you, again, minimize your exposure. And the other thing you get here is Hello for Business. So in this school client, I do have Hello for Business, as in Windows Hello for Business. You can sign in using biometrics on your end user devices. Up until fairly recently, that required MFA to be set up. So staff members at the school could do Windows Hello for Business on their devices, fingerprint scan or a face scan, but I couldn't do it for the students because they don't all have smartphones, so I couldn't set up MFA for them. That's gone away, but setting this up with a hybrid infrastructure was fairly clunky. So my plan is at this stage in February next year, when these students come back, all the students, or at least the high school students, will be enrolled to set up biometrics on their machines as well, because you no longer need MFA to set that up. And setting it up in the cloud with their Entra ID joined devices that are no longer hybrid will be a lot more straightforward. And job done. They'll sign in with biometrics and they don't have to use their passwords anymore, which is really fantastic.
Oh, students will love not having to remember passwords.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. Well, what do we got left on the list here, Paul? I think we
need to talk about, one of the things that we need to talk about is troubleshooting, because sometimes when you talk to sysadmins, they tend to be wary of the loss of control. Because when it's all on-prem, and I can remember that because I used to have it all on-prem. When it's all on-prem, you have control. You can see the things, you can touch them, you got access to every part of the chain, whether it's, the motherboard that's having a problem, or the memory chip, or the software, or the patch, or the application, or the network. You got control over all of that. When you go to the cloud, you lose some of that control. So troubleshooting used to be, hey, I got to gather all the details about this thing, and then we got to figure out where in the logical chain the problem exists. To now you go, okay, there is a problem. Let's check first, is there a common cloud problem for everybody or for my region? And then if that's not the case, it is, let's gather up all the information we have and then open a case with your vendor, whether that's, Salesforce or Google or Microsoft or whoever, because you don't have that access anymore. And then they have to look inside of their infrastructure because they have access to that infrastructure. You don't. So that loss of control is something to get used to. But frankly, I like that, because they can be the experts on that shit. I don't have to be, pardon my swearing, you don't have to be the expert on everything, right? Because nobody is. Right? You got switches and routers and networking gear and servers and God, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that could go wrong, and you got to know all of that, or you got to have colleagues that know all of that. Now it's like, yeah, it's a Microsoft problem. Fix it.
Yeah, I agree. I was a server hugger for a long, long time. You were going to pry that thing out of my cold, dead hands, but I came around, and it was like kind of the same thing, is because, kind of like the Ghost CMS thing I was talking about earlier. There's just some stuff I don't want to have to bother with anymore, So same rules apply. So yeah, I'm right there with you.
So I suppose the other thing we need to round off with here is the fact that hybrid makes you less secure. And this is a well-known fact, been talked a lot about in the cybersecurity industry. There has been numerous real-world attacks where the bad guys have compromised cloud identity first, then pivoted to on-premises, or even more common, they compromise something on-prem and then pivoted into the cloud. And you essentially go, okay, I have my Active Directory, I've secured that, I've got my Entra ID, I've secured that, and now I'm connecting both of them. And I'm be secure? No, you'll be less secure because you basically doubled your attack surface, right? Now, any risks, whether it's Dirk Jan Molima finding God mode in Entra ID for you, or any other kind of attack on Entra, you're susceptible to, as well as anything on premises. And if you don't have very strict governance, you'll have the same identities on-prem and in the cloud for your admins, and now they are twice as likely to be compromised. Basically, that's a what do you call it? A very quick summary of the risks, but essentially that is the problem, right?
Right.
The second thing is that you have much more complexity because you now have two worlds to manage and they're connected. And complexity is always the enemy of security. And it's the enemy of reliability and stability. Hence your comment earlier about the MSP that you worked for, right? And the number of tickets. Soon as you go to cloud, the number of tickets go down because there's just less crap to break.
I mean, for the smaller customers, I mean, you could go months without getting a support ticket generated by any of them because it just worked, and the systems were in place to where, like, okay, just reboot your machine and it was fine. Or they knew how to reset their machines and, autopilot takes care of it for them, So, I mean, yeah. Good times.
Yeah. And of course, it's more adaptable to work from anywhere, right? So no matter where you are, as long as you've got an internet connection, you can just work. You don't have to worry about it. Now, if you want network control over all of that, I'll just throw this in here. So one of the other things that happen is that when you're on premises and you have resources on premises, people have to get to those on premises. And if they're not on premises, you have to provide a solution. VPN is obviously the one that we've been using for the last few decades, right? But VPNs are terrible for security. Like the most of them are so terrible. It's and they're what gets a lot of organizations compromised, right? So just so that you can sit at home and get to the file server on-prem, you have to have a VPN in place. You have to have a VPN concentrator somewhere in your on-prem infrastructure where the connections come into, and that thing is full of code that's 10 years old and nobody's ever audited properly. And that gets you compromised left, right, and center. Right? So instead, all of that goes away because your file server isn't on-prem anymore. It lives in the cloud, and you've got modern cloud protections you can put in place. So, but if you want full control here, Microsoft's solution is Global Secure Access, which contains Microsoft 365 access. You get that for free. Internet access, where you can control exactly which websites and services users can and can't go to, no matter where they are, whether they're behind the corporate firewall or they're working from their local Starbucks. And you have the private internet access, which is for all the resources you still have on-prem. So RDP servers, file servers, whatever, you can securely connect your users to that, but you can protect it all with modern identity and modern conditional access policies. So you can say, yes, you're an administrator. Yes, you need to RDP into this server on-prem, but to do that, you have to do an extra MFA, and it has to be phishing-resistant MFA, and then you can get in and do RDP.
Right. Oh, man, we covered a lot of ground in this episode, Paul. A lot of ground. Anytime you involve the end user or anything to do with the end user, it's always a lot, always a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
So, well, just for sake of completeness, I know you mentioned it earlier regarding Windows Server. So,
oh, yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Well done.
Yeah.
Catching up on that. So, one of the things, though, that people say, well, hang on, I've got an Active Directory that can manage my servers. I can do group policy on my servers, and I have Configuration Manager, and it can manage my servers. So what can Microsoft do for me in the cloud? You go to Intune, and they go, sorry, mate, it's not our department. And they've been saying not our department for the last 10, 12 years.
Yeah.
The reason they're saying that is because there's no MDM stack. There's no third-party MDM management of Windows Server either, unless they put their own agent on. There is
Right.
no built-in MDM stack because it's just not in the operating system. It's in Windows Client, Windows 11, 10, but it's not in Windows Server. So how do you manage servers? So Microsoft's solution today is Azure Arc. So we can do a whole session on Azure Arc, which is a separate conversation as we get it towards
There's a
our
big
end.
conversation there.
But basically, this is take a server, a Kubernetes cluster, a database, a machine learning cluster, and a few other things. But let's say a server here, which is Windows or Linux server. You put a small agent on it. It connects it to the Azure control plane. That server, no matter where it's running, third-party cloud, on-premises, anywhere else, it'll show up right next to any other server you have running in Azure. You can manage it with Azure Policy. You can back it up with Azure Backup. You can put identity protection on it, the same as any other identity you manage in the cloud. And that gives you all the goodness of Azure for remote management of this server. That's Microsoft's answer today. Now, Arc has been sort of not exactly aimed at, hey, you used to use Configuration Manager, now just use Azure Arc and you'll have the same thing. It's been sort of aimed at a different market, but they're coming around and they're now saying, if you have servers, you want to manage them, Azure Arc is the way to go. Because they're putting more and more feature in to match what you get out of Configuration Manager today.
Yeah, I love Arc. I use it frequently. I did a session at PowerShell Summit, not this year, but last year, on the secure management of secrets during automation. And you can do something really cool with Arc. So using managed identity in Entra, using Azure Key Vault, you can have an on-premise server with the Arc agent installed, securely access a secret contained in Azure Key Vault, and the secrets are all secured end-to-end. Nobody has to type in a password anywhere. For automated processes requiring secrets, it is a godsend. I'll link. That session was recorded. I'll link that in the show notes.
It was definitely recorded because I watched it. It was a great session. It was a really good session. So
so that was a fun one. I remember when I came to that realization, I was like instant game changer. I was just so excited. I still have the I'm old and gray now in my sysadmin years, but I still get that giddy inner kid sysadmin excitement from time to time. So anyway, well, Paul, always good talking to you, my friend. Ton of great information here from you, and I really appreciate your insights and sharing your knowledge as well. So thank you as always.
Well, everybody wish me luck. We'll see how we go with this migration project. Maybe we'll record another session early next year where I tell my warts and all story of how it all went.
I'm sure it'll go completely fine. Fingers crossed.
Well, I'm not worried about the students' devices. There is a new service. It's in preview at the moment called Windows Backup, Windows Settings Backup or something, which is free. So that will back up like your Windows endpoint settings to the cloud, and then you get your new device, or in this case, a reset device, just puts those back on. So hopefully that will help with the student devices. But it's the teacher devices because they tend to take those home with them and work on them. And I'm going to literally have to go, well, sorry, these holidays, you don't get your device because I'm going to have it. I'm going to reset it and it's going to blow away everything you've got on it. So you better back it out. So that's going to be a bit of a thing. So we'll see how it goes.
Well, fingers crossed for you. So we'll have to check back in with you on that. So anyway, folks, you watching, hope you enjoyed today's episode and hopefully you got some value out of it. A couple of closing items here. Again, you can reach the show on multiple platforms, so you can watch it on YouTube. If you want to see our smiling faces while we talk through this, we are, of course, available also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Podcasts as well. So multiple places to catch the show. Be sure to check out the companion newsletter as well. That newsletter comes out bi-weekly, so every 2 weeks. That one is not weekly like the podcast is, but every 2 weeks on that one. You can find that at newsletter.sysadminweekly.com. And we include all kinds of cool stuff in that particular newsletter. There's always a tool of the week. We include some community content. I tell a funny story or an in the trenches story occasionally. So be sure to check that out again, newsletter.sysadminweekly.com. And a reminder, if you have a sysadmin horror story that you would like to have featured on our Sysadmin Horror Stories episode later in October, again, you can drop us an email at contact@sysadminweekly.com. Would love to hear your sysadmin horror stories because it's just a fun pastime of sysadmins everywhere, I guess. It's like war vets having to compare scars, it's kind of the same thing. So anyway, we'll let you get back to your day, folks. Appreciate you spending some time with us. Stay safe out there, and we will catch you again next week for another episode of Sysadmin Weekly. Have a good one.